Good evening and very warm welcome to everyone. My name's Zeba Malik. I'm proud to be a trustee of the John Schofield Trust. Our vision is to have journalism as diverse as the people it serves. And so it's very apt that we're delighted to be holding this conversation on diversity this evening. Just a couple of things in advance. Apologies for any issues that we have in terms of technical issues. It's a Zoom webinar. Fingers crossed that will happen tonight, but we can't guarantee it. Also, apologies in advance for any errant children that may come in front of screen. I'm kind of maybe guilty of that at some point, so I apologise. And also that this is being recorded as well. So we intend to have a link to this conversation on the John Schofield Trust website at some point in the very near future. So without much further ado, I'm delighted to invite Gillian Joseph, who has very kindly agreed to be our host for this evening's conversation. Gillian, as I'm sure you know, is a very well-known face from Sky News. So thank you very much, Gillian. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Good evening, everyone. Now, at a time when diversity, inclusion and equality are being reported by news organisations, this evening we'll be asking what these organisations are doing themselves to improve representation on and off screen. We'll be discussing the policies in place, what improvements can be made and the challenges ahead. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Kamal Ahmed, Editorial Director of BBC News, Babita Bahal, Editor of Creative Diversity for Channel 4, and Vikki Cook, Head of Ofcom's Diversity and Inclusion Programme. Welcome to you all. I'm sure this will be a lively conversation. At least I'm hoping it will be. I'll be talking to our panelists for around 30 minutes, and then we'll be asking your questions, not my questions, your questions. We want you to send those in via the Q&A function. So if you keep that in mind throughout the discussion. So let's kick off, and we are going to start with you, Vikki. We know that Ofcom's undertaken research to assess diversity amongst broadcasters. What exactly have you found? How are broadcasters performing when it comes to diversity?
Gillian, thanks very much for inviting me onto the panel this evening. Hello to everyone who has joined this call. I think it's probably fair to say that Ofcom has a very loud voice in the diversity space, and that's not just mine. Ours is a very proactive and collaborative approach, and we work with broadcasters right across the UK industry, obviously in the TV and radio space as well. I think just before I want to give a few headlines to our progress to date, I think it's fair enough to say if we thought 2020 was going to be a challenging year, we had no idea what was coming down the tracks with a worldwide pandemic, a complete shutdown of society as we know it in the form of lockdown, and a broadcast industry, I think, like many, facing that critical point in history. And then if that wasn't enough, thousands of miles away in America, we had the turning point with the brutal murder of George Floyd. And I think that was a moment that finally changed this conversation actually on equality and issues of race. So I think we have spent the last 3 years since 2017 holding broadcasters to account in terms of our annual diversity reports, both into the TV and radio industries. I think we've made some great progress, and I hope, I'm sure Kamal and Babita would agree with that, but I think there's still so much more to do. But I think because of our work, because of our reports, I think we now have a much better idea of who's actually working in TV and radio, and I think broadcasters would acknowledge actually that our work has really helped shift the dial as we've been able to report on a steady increase in underrepresented groups across the industry. I think a couple of other things which I think is worth talking about. In our TV report last year, we shone a light on socio-economic status and the inequality across the sector, And that's, you know, I suppose a lot of people said, was that really a surprise? Because we revealed that TV workers are twice as likely to have attended a private school compared to the average person. So those were sort of some of the headlines from last year. Just worth mentioning as well, while not directly within our remit, Ofcom has relentlessly kept the issue of freelancers working within the broadcast industry in the spotlight, linking and working with groups such as the Creative Diversity Network on its industry freelancer initiative Diamond, and holding a freelancer roundtable in 2019 for unions and industry to facilitate better mutual understanding. Is it all going in the right direction? I think the simple answer is yes. Is it going quickly in the right direction? Is it going quickly enough? I think the answer is no. But as I said, I think this year we are at that pivotal moment with some of these questions around diversity and inclusion. And I think there will be an awful lot of change over the next 6 months. And as the independent regulator, we are very clear that we will continue to hold those broadcasters to account on those commitments they've made.
You've been very clear about holding broadcasters to account and highlighting the areas, the problematic areas, but do you offer solutions? Are you offering recommendations? And does Ofcom have teeth?
Does Ofcom have
teeth?
Yes, we do have teeth. I think it's very, very, very fair to say we have teeth. I think there are a number of things. You know, when we talk to broadcasters, there is no doubt that approaching the publication of our reports every year, there is a certain trepidation because what our reports do is basically shine a very harsh spotlight on those broadcasters that are doing well and those that aren't. And for a very competitive industry, that's quite an uncomfortable place to be, having that much transparency. And I think actually we produce an awful lot of guidance. There's an awful lot of guidance and support for broadcasters. And we mustn't forget there's an awful long tail of small to medium-sized broadcasters that perhaps don't always have so much of the sort of backroom infrastructure to work up D&I initiatives. So we provide an awful lot of support for industry. As I said, we facilitate and hold regular discussions with broadcasters. We've started now to hold a quarterly roundtable right across the sector with radio and TV. And actually, I can't, I'm staggered by the collaboration now that really is coming through, as I said, both in radio and TV, so right across the sector. We're really clear that this is not a nice to have, this is a business critical area. And we're really clear as well, this has to be driven from the top. For the first time ever in our first reporting year, all 5 chief execs of the main broadcasters, BBC, DG obviously, committed on camera to us that this had to change, and they were committed to D&I initiatives and the D&I agenda. So yes, we are not quiet in this space, and if we don't think enough progress is being made, we are not shy about calling out where it's not good enough.
Kamal, if I come to you next, you're responsible for future editorial strategy. In your opinion, why is diversity within broadcasting so important?
So I think, Gillian, you put your finger on it at the start of this conversation, and thanks very much. I want to echo Vikki's thanks to the invite for this, the work that the John Schofield Trust does, which I've been very privileged to be involved in the past. It's this type of work actually that helps us increase diversity. Organisations like the John Schofield Trust are part of that. And I think it's about the content we make to serve all audiences with content that is useful, informative, and from my position as editorial director of news, helps people understand the world around them and the country they live in, or the countries they live in, is only done successfully if internally we have the right people with a wide range of experiences and backgrounds to help us in that work. And there are always 2 sides to diversity. And one side is the internal side. Who do we have working at all levels that give us that diverse and inclusive culture across BBC News? And then also, what are the type of stories that we are doing which make sure that we are serving all audiences as we should? And I think Vikki makes a really important point. I've been reporting, Gillian, you and I have known each other for many, many years. And I've been reporting on diversity at the BBC when I was media editor of The Guardian in the 1990s. And most people on this call weren't even born then and don't even know what the 1990s was. But in the era of dinosaurs and steam trains, it was one of those things. And to Vikki's point, it was almost like a nice to have. Wouldn't it be good if we were more diverse? Isn't that quite useful? And the conversation was really had in that way, as if almost it was a gift that the broadcasters should be good enough to give people from different backgrounds. And that has totally changed. I would say actually more rapidly than simply what's happened since the death of George Floyd. I think over a number of years now, broadcasters have become increasingly aware of, if they don't get this right, their relationships with audiences will crumble, and they don't have a right to exist in the future. And it has moved from a negotiable, I think, as you put it, Vikki, to a non-negotiable. And I think the conversations that we have with Vikki and her colleagues at Ofcom, I know Pan BBC we have with Channel 4, and Babita and others, are so important, because this is a sector issue for all of us. We're all being challenged. And at the BBC, I found in this job, I've been in this job for 18 months now, and before that I was an on-air editor. I think we are now connecting more directly the editorial, the need for editorial diversity with the need for internal diversity. And that inclusion is part of that. There is no point in simply asking people from diverse backgrounds to join an organization where they have to fit the organization. The organization has to start fitting the people who are joining. It's the other way around, and that's why inclusion is so important. We can't just simply talk about diversity, which can sometimes look a bit like a numbers game, and you measure what you can see. And I think, Vikki, again, your point about socioeconomic background is vital in terms of how we consider diversity. This can sometimes look a lot like a middle-class business for middle-class people. Also geography, where we report from, the people who report on behalf of our audiences is vitally important. And I suppose the test is that we need to show results. We need to start auditing and accounting for what we do editorially, as well as what we do internally. I think we've had for quite a while ways of measuring ourselves internally, and we have had some successes there in terms of the seniority of people from different backgrounds in our organization. But for the first time in the autumn, we're going to start looking and accounting for and auditing how we serve different audiences with great content that is useful for them and is useful across the number of diverse audiences we know we have around the UK and around the world. And that's quite a move for us. We announced 2 weeks ago a new commissioning group, which I've been offered the great privilege to chair. And we are going to be looking at our commissioning through the prism of diversity and inclusion and the commitments we make to our audiences over that. And that's the first time in news that we've done that. And it builds on what BBC more generally under Tony, our Director General, has been doing with the help of June Sarpong, our new creative director, which is looking at how across the BBC we can look at these issues in a more joined up way, and then joining up with other broadcasters. So, as I say, I've been in this business an awful long time. I've been writing and thinking about diversity for a lot of that time. And I do feel there is a step change. And I would take it before the George Floyd issues. I think for the last few years, I would say, I'm very fortunate to be the first person of colour to serve on Newsgroup board for the BBC, for BBC News. And I think that there is much more thought now into these issues and how important they are, and how we encourage different voices, different generations, different socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as the more obvious protected characteristics that we all know about and are more clearly definable maybe, but that we have to be thinking about diversity. I know, speaking to Vikki particularly, Vikki, the Ofcom reports has raised regularly with us our issues with things like younger audiences in particular. and it's something that we're really focused on.
I wonder what the panel makes of the idea that diversity should be diversity of thought, and that should be the ideal rather than a physical diversity. There's an infamous interview that was been doing the rounds that, courtesy of Sky, with Matt Hancock unable to name black members of the cabinet, and he said diversity of thought is the really important thing. I'd like to get your views, all of your views on that, but if you come in first, Babita.
Yeah, before I start, yes, I just want to say thank you for the invitation. Just one slight correction. I work with Editorial. I'm not Editorial, I'm a head of creative diversity, but I do feed in across our commissioning teams, across all the content on Channel 4, including Channel 4 News.
Well, we promoted you for the evening.
Thank you. I appreciate it. They'll go down well at Channel 4. So, yeah, diversity of thought, it's another layer. I think actually though, what we need to do, what we need to get right is making sure that we don't have any blind spots in terms of the audience that we're trying to represent. And I think that has to start with the physical makeup. You know, it's about the things that Kamal said. It's about, you know, socioeconomic diversity. It's about where people are in the country, you know, what their cultural ethnic backgrounds are, because that is the thing that connects them to the range of stories and the broad content that we need to be covering. And I think simply saying it's about thinking differently isn't enough on its own. We need to have all those different voices in the room, because that's how you connect with audiences. And I think Kamal's right when you say actually we need to have all the voices in the room to make sure we remain relevant. You know, there's no secret about younger audiences and harder to reach audiences sort of not consuming through linear TV anymore. You know, we need to think about who they are and how we connect with them, and that comes from having people who represent them, who look like them, who have had life experiences that are the same as theirs, working within the channels, reporting for us, going out, getting those stories and bringing that point of difference to the channel. And I think the point about young audiences is really pertinent, because I think that, you know, of course, viewing across all the channels, across everything, went up during lockdown. But one of the things that we're most proud of at Channel 4 is that we saw a massive increase in Black and Asian minority ethnic viewers, but particularly from that 16 to 34 age range. That was up 50% for us. That's been up 50% for us year on year, and that's because we're working really hard to have that mix of voices and representation in the teams. And I think when you see the stories that our reporters are bringing to the table, they just feel there's just a breadth of experience and range in there that you just wouldn't get even if you had a group of people from similar backgrounds that just thought slightly differently.
Vikki, I'll just take a quick answer from you and Kamal before we move on. Is this diversity of thought, is that a smokescreen?
No, not at all. I think diversity of thought is crucial, and it's something actually we've talked a lot about over the last few years. That's why, and I know, you know, a lot of people across the industry agree, that's why it's so frustrating when you talk about diversity in terms of tick boxes and characteristics. You know, diversity is inclusion, it's intersectionality. And I think one of the things that we draw out, not just with our diversity workforce reports, but our first thematic review of the BBC when we took over as independent regulator into representation and portrayal, and the huge amount of audience research we do, whether it's our review into news and current affairs, which Kamal will be very familiar with, is the fact audiences want authenticity. You know, time and time again, people say, when I watch something or listen to something, I want to know it's made by someone who looks and sounds like me and understands the issues. And you can only get that through a proper, diverse workforce. And that diversity of thought has to be at the centre of content creation.
And Kamal, to you as well, that question on diversity of thought as opposed to physical diversity.
I think you need to use all the levers that kind of sit under what diversity and inclusion is, and diversity of thought is one of those. It's really important that people are able to, for us, enter editorial meetings with an open mind and to be able to consider things from points of view that aren't their own. But it is also important to have the actual diversity of different people from different backgrounds and with different characteristics. But clearly, I don't think you can have one without the other. We all have our prejudices. We all have our blind spots, I think, Babita, as you described it. We all have things we don't understand in the world. And we need to be able to approach decision-making to understand those weaknesses that we all carry around with us, whoever we are, whatever our backgrounds and characteristics. And also, you can't just get into a brutal numbers game. That won't get you to really diverse output and diverse internal culture. If you just have that, well, we've got that number of that type and we've got this number of this number, and that doesn't work. No organization can do that. It is helpful to have the data about what it is you are doing, and really important. And physical presence, as you say, Gillian, is really important. I'm very fortunate that things like the Ouch podcast, which is journalism is for disabled people, but for all audiences, and is run by a team of disabled people as well as able-bodied people. That's really important. But also the fact that Damon Rose, who heads up that podcast, has great diversity of thought is also really important. So you need to get the right mix of those two things. It's not one or the other. It's a sort of and relationship.
Yes, and as you brought up, I mean, we're not just talking about race and gender, talking about people with disabilities as well. Just looking at some of the Ofcom research, Vikki, disabled people remain seriously underrepresented at 6% compared to 18% of the UK labour market average. How are they being included in the discussion, Vikki?
Well, it's a very pertinent point, actually, because I was only on a call with two of Kamal's colleagues, actually, Nina Goswami and Sean Dilley at lunchtime. The Media Trust have been driving a really high-profile campaign on reframing disability, and we've come to the end of phase one in that. You're absolutely right. There was a depressing stagnation in terms of levels of representation last year for people with disabilities in the industry, stuck at 6%. Which was just a year-on-year stasis. There is a huge focus on disability through CDN's, the Creative Diversity Network's Doubling Disability Initiative. All broadcasters have signed up to that. And the reason it has been a key focus for our discussions, and certainly was a key part of our discussion at our last round table, with 20 or so of the broadcasters just 3 weeks ago, was the fact that obviously COVID has impacted, as it has, on so many initiatives, and there is a slight stalling in the Doubling Disability Initiative, much of which would have been reported on this year, but that will delay by about 6 months. But it's certainly, it's not been swept under the carpet, and I think there's more pressure than ever before, certainly on broadcasters, that as they emerge from COVID and they emerge from lockdown, that diversity and inclusion cannot afford to go back into that nice to have category. And I don't think anyone, certainly not anyone on this call, would even consider that. It has to remain business critical. So the pressure and the focus on industry to not just revert to those old factory settings, I think it is more keen than ever. And toward the end of the year, when our report comes out, we will be very vocal around that.
Time is pushing on very, very quickly. Just remind people to send in your questions on the Q&A function. I'm only going to move on to another topic because of time running out. And Babita, I wanted to ask you about the ethnicity pay gap. We know that there is a gender pay gap, and wanted to know what significant discussions there are at Channel 4 around the ethnicity pay gap.
Well, yeah, lots actually. It's one of the things that we've reported alongside the gender BME, we've actually reported disability and LGBT pay gaps as well. And that's because it's really important. I think the starting point with any sort of pay gap conversation is to have that transparency, to know where you are, but then also it's the starting point to look at how and what we're doing to address that, and that's all really looking at the internal workforce and looking at representation at different levels, and we know that and I think this is across the industry, that oftentimes we're really good at getting people in at entry level, and we're not so great at progressing them past that mid-level of their careers. So we're doing quite a lot of work at looking at middle management, looking at sort of career interventions, looking at how we progress people into into those more middle management roles. And actually, ironically, at Channel 4 News, so I'm separating sort of Channel 4, the main broadcast from Channel 4 News, you know, two out of their 6 senior leadership are from Black and Asian minority ethnic backgrounds. So, you know, at entry level and at the top of the organisation, we're doing all right. It's the spread in the rest of the organisation that we're really having to focus on, and look at how we retain people. That's really important. That's a big piece of the inclusive culture. So quite often there's a bit of a revolving door around diverse talent. We're very good, and I spent 6 years doing this work at the BBC, so I can I know how it is across the broadcasters. You know, people, we do a great job of attraction and then not such a great job of retention. So I think that's the focus. It's a big focus for us in terms of the culture we create and how we progress people. And I think I can say this similar at the BBC as well. And that's the key to all of this, isn't it? It's moving beyond just getting the representation and getting the numbers in, to make sure that people are actually building careers, feeling like they can be the best version of themselves that they need to be to progress, and that they've got the right support around them to do that.
Kamal, I wanted to raise a question with you that actually a few people have asked me to raise it, in terms of perhaps this might not have happened if there was a more diverse newsroom. And it's what would you say to Black people who were upset having to hear a BBC reporter use the N-word in a report that was on news yesterday? Presumably this would have been signed off.
So this came from a Nations and Regions report. The BBC obviously is structured in different divisions. This was a Nations and Regions report done for Points West. It wasn't a BBC News report. Clearly, the N-word is a highly offensive term, which is not used unless there is a very strong editorial reason for doing so. And as you say, Gillian, there is a strong process around any decision to do that. But this was a Nations and Regions report that was put together. And it did run on the news channel. It was taken from the Points West programme and then ran on the news channel, and it's not going to be run again. But the decision to do that was with Nations and Regions, and the guidance was given by editorial policy to them. But we are well aware that that word is, you know, remarkably offensive to, well, maybe everybody, I don't know, but as a Black person, and certainly to Black people from African and Afro-Caribbean backgrounds, it has an awfulness which is very hard to understand from people who have not experienced either their families having that term used against them, or actually being discriminated around the issue of them being Black, or have had that word thrown at them themselves when they were growing up at school, or even now. And we've seen from the events in Bristol that story was about, how the horrific nature of racism is still with us. We actually interviewed the family today around that story, and we've been running a story tonight about an interview with the family. But as I say, it was run once on the channel and is not going to be run again.
But it does throw up the question that clearly within that newsroom and possibly at editorial level, there can't have been, I would presume, a person of colour involved, and hence the grave mistake.
I don't know, Gillian, about the people who oversaw it. As I say, it wasn't actually our division who complied that piece of work. So I don't know about that. I know that we are looking at it, but it wasn't complied by us.
Okay. Vikki, why do you think that companies have failed to hit their diversity target? The figures are quite depressing. Your report saying that the broadcast industry will take 3 years to catch up on the UK figure for Black, Asian and minority ethnic employees in senior management. 3 years to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not gonna say it's, you know, it's all easily achievable overnight. And I think there have been some really much more honest conversations in the last 2 or 3 months about properly addressing equality and issues around race and ethnicity, and we are failing. You know, industry is failing on targets. To Babita's point earlier, there is that real sort of frozen middle, and that's not just around ethnicity, that's around gender as well. It's also around people with disabilities. We are very aware of that. As I said, we are working really closely with industry. I think just with some of the announcements that you've seen, both from Channel 4, ITV, BBC, just over the last few weeks, Viacom, in terms of the real focus on very publicly trying to address diversity issues on screen, as well as off screen, with initiatives around bespoke commissioning, then I think that will go some way to address it. I know there is always a sort of desire that we want to get this sorted and fixed, and we want to do it quickly. But look, you know, at Ofcom as well, to one of the questions on the chat, you know, at senior level, you know, there is still a lot to be done in terms of boards and committees right across industry, and as I said, at Ofcom itself, and that's not something we've ever shied away from, nor has industry. But I think, you know, if this is driven from the very top, you know, back to your original point around diversity of thought, then you have to have that diversity of thought leading industries from the very top. So it's not something that's going to change overnight. It's not something I want to put a particular time frame around. I'm always asked, you know, when's it all going to be sorted? My hope actually is we're going to get much more rapid progress over the next 12 months than we might have done. But yes, there's, you know, I will say it again. I think we've made huge strides, but I think there is a long way to go, and there's some quite uncomfortable conversations to come as well.
Okay, well, we want to talk about solutions, obviously, as you say, not a problem that can be fixed overnight, but I want to bring in a survey of 100 of John Schofield Trust mentors and mentees. And amongst their solutions, they say there should be paid work experience and paid internships. I know that Sky we do pay our interns. I don't know about other broadcasters. More apprenticeships, bursaries, training programs, changing recruitment to include blind applications or written or video submission, which I thought was quite interesting. Possibly quotas, and they talk about journalism needing to be more accessible to people from different backgrounds. Just very quickly, I'll just take one sentence from each of you before we go to questions. This idea of blind applications, what do you think to that, Babita?
I think it's more about the emphasis about what you're looking for when you're recruiting, and trying to strip out any biases that you might have. So, you know, when I was at the BBC and at Channel 4 as well, we're trying to look at other ways of assessing someone's capability to do a job, rather than did they go to Oxbridge. You know, there's those sort of old school sort of tick boxes that sort of get you through the door straight away, but also looking at more innovative ways of how people apply for jobs as well. Again, when I was at the BBC, we're looking at ways of, you know, in a creative industry, you know, is it appropriate to have a sort of written wordy application form?
Yes,
you could
yes.
make...
Well, on that, just to move on because of time, on that, Kamal, what do you think about video submissions, you know, instead of a CV, for instance?
Yeah, I think Babita makes a really strong point. We need to test on different things. For a long time, we have over-indexed on years and years and years and years of experience. And that can lead to a certain type of person, you know, being able to continue. And I think that we need to rethink about what qualities we are looking for. And the issue you have with blind applications, which you would have to think about, is that it means that you maybe haven't changed your culture enough to be considering a diverse range of people.
Yeah, good point.
I want to see the diverse range of people, and I want to know, you know, something about them and who they are, and I feel that blind, it's a bit like unconscious bias training. It just slightly raises a little bit of an alarm bell in my mind that you're not really changing your culture if you're relying on issues like that rather than on an approach which is, to Vikki's original point at the very beginning of this, if you don't realize this is business critical and you are not tested on diversity inclusion as a leader in any organization, then you've got a real problem. So I think video submission, I think Babita, you make a very good point that we need to, this is a creative industry, and if we are falling back on having to be able to produce the lengthy, perfect text-based CV like we had to do when we first came into, you know, the industry, I think there is a challenge there. Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, one word answer. Have you done unconscious bias training, Kamal?
No.
Babita?
Yes, several times, and actually
one word answer.
Sorry,
one word answer.
The BBC. Yes, several times.
Vikki, last but not least, Vikki.
Yes.
Right. And that makes 4 of us. I have as well. Right, let us take some questions now. I'll wait for my helpers to read those out.
Okay, so lots of very interesting and actually, funnily enough, diverse questions coming in. There is an anonymous question specifically for you, Vikki. So has Ofcom considered there isn't one person of colour on its board? Why is that, and how can it regulate the sector if it itself lacks racial diversity at a senior level?
Yes, that's a very good question. I did sort of half answer that in an answer just now. But yes, absolutely. And we have to reflect the society we serve, and we're very open about that. And we fully acknowledge that we have further to go, meeting our internal targets as well on our boards and committees. We've grown in size over the years, and last year we grew by 6% across the organisation. We've maintained a steady proportion of senior minority ethnic colleagues year on year, though again, to that recruitment point, we recognise that we have much more to do to recruit and also retain people from minority ethnic backgrounds at senior level. But yes, it's something we are very conscious of. We have a brand new D&I long-term strategy under our new chief exec, which will be launched later this year in the autumn.
Okay, Vikki, thank you. Let's take another question.
So, Gillian, this question's come in also from an anonymous attendee, and this is for everybody. And it says, hi, I'm a freelancer who has gained experience and still struggling to get a break or long-term work. I don't understand. If we are focusing on diversity, why do I feel as an Asian female who's pitched lots of ideas from the underserved audiences, and I've done lots of work experience, it feels like if you don't have a champion or a sponsor, you don't get the break into the industry. Is there any advice on how I can move forwards? Maybe
I'd like to take that.
Yeah, maybe Kamal start with that one, maybe.
I've always found to this person, you are right. You do need a champion, a mentor, somebody who can help you navigate the complexities of the media sector. I've had most of my career in print media, but I've been in broadcasting for the last 5 years, and it is a complicated sector. And all of us, I think, have a duty who are privileged enough and fortunate enough to get into leadership positions to mentor both internally and externally. I've been fortunate enough, I'm a trustee of the Media Trust that Vikki mentioned earlier, which is doing a lot of work around disability, for example, but also many other things. And the Media Trust certainly is one of those organizations that helps with those networks, and John Schofield Trust, of course, does exactly that. So I would advise it's doing calls like this and listening to, hopefully, if some of the things have been helpful that we have said, I hope that's true, but it's then linking in with groups like the John Schofield Trust, because that's the connecting point with a lot of us. So I've done very limited work for the John Schofield Trust, but I have done a lot of work for the Media Trust. And I know that has been a way of many younger people and people from different backgrounds that aren't well represented in the sector getting an in. And I found certainly when I was a younger journalist trying to climb up in the industry, it was all about finding those people who could support, mentor, help you think about how you were doing the role you were doing and how you could improve that role. So I think that's the really important part of it.
Babita, advice for a struggling freelancer who's pitched many ideas and has worked extremely hard, it sounds, but to no avail as yet.
I think there are two things. I think it is incredibly competitive, so it's important to make sure when you're putting yourself out there that you're expressing your point of difference, so that people get excited about you and think, oh my God, I haven't heard that story before, I haven't heard something from that perspective before. It's also an incredibly networked industry, and one of the things I always say to people is, when you're getting in touch with people, always say, is there anyone else you can introduce me to? I try and introduce everyone that comes to me to at least 3 other people, and it's about growing that network and being persistent. And sadly, I think there is still a bit of about who you know and making sure that you've got champions and voices in the rooms that you're not in. And I hear people, because I hear this all day, every day from lots of people who are frustrated, who say, you know, as broadcasters, you say diversity is important and I can't seem to get a break. And I think it's about having a certain resilience and having that unique voice and story that you keep bringing to the table, and people like me will keep pushing for you, you know. And I think I know who this person is because I think they've texted me directly as well. And, you know, just I keep putting people forward and keep pushing for people, and I think that's what we all need to keep doing collectively.
Vikki, any advice to add?
Listen, my heart sort of goes out to you, because I think about the times when I was in TV and radio, and those times when I was sort of trying to knock on doors and make a break. I think Kamal and Babita both make excellent points. Yes, we're trying to move the conversation away from it's who you know, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, as to Kamal's point, you know, network. These sorts of conversations are fantastic, and if there's one thing COVID has done, it's sort of added a certain layer of democratization to be able to access a lot more people and contacts and networks. But also I think Babita makes a really important point that we often overlook, and that's the fact it is a fiercely competitive industry, you know, and there are lots of brilliant people working in it. But it does need to widen its pool of creativity and diverse talent. So any ideas you have in terms of connecting, asking people if they'll mentor, and a lot of groups run mentoring schemes. That's just what you have to do. You really do have to, put the time and effort in.
Gillian, can I just add one more thing? Just thinking, sorry, Gillian. I mean, the other thing, from an editorial point of view, is finding that unique thing that you can bring to the table. And often that is because you come from a different background. And what has often really helped someone into an organization, and I certainly found this when I was, in that position where you're trying to, as you say, Vikki, sort of fight your way up. It's about thinking to yourself, right, what particular skill do I have? How can I use that to do something that that organization really wants? And then go to the table with something that I've got the first interview with X, which you really need to do. And that can really spark a different type of conversation, rather than sometimes you can get slightly overloaded by the ideas fest. Here's a long list of lots and lots of ideas, because internally in an organization, editorially, we already have a huge list of editorial ideas. We already have within the BBC lots and lots of people trying to drive their ideas. So it can be very hard from the outside. It's about that uniqueness, and that is where diversity becomes really important, because if you know that inside the organization they're missing something because they don't have the right type of people, and you can bring that to the table, that can be a really powerful way of doing it. And that just needs one sentence to somebody that you know why the network's important. I've got X, because we're all driven, well, in news, by the journalism. If you've got X and we need X, we'll take it. And that's an important part of the journalism world that I work in.
Ain't that the truth? I wanted to round up on a positive on that and say it is incredibly competitive, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. And I really would like to, offer you a lot of encouragement, this questioner, because I can sense the frustration in that question there. Let's move on to another question from the audience.
Okay, so another anonymous question. Which is, while media companies say they're committed to hiring more diverse staff through schemes and entry-level roles, what's being done to help the retention of these people? And if they are one of the few retained, how are they supported and promoted? And that ties in with another question, which was about senior level diversity as well.
So retention, recruitment, obviously is something that companies are striving towards, but then once you've employed the people, how do you keep them, and how do you actually progress their careers? Vikki?
I think it's such a pertinent question, and it goes to something I was talking about earlier, and that's that frozen middle. And that's the problem, that a lot of companies are very good now actually at recruiting in a diverse way, and they know it makes sense, and they know what they have to do, and are trying different approaches. The problem is, you might be able to recruit in a diverse way, but then how do you retain that brilliant talent? And not only how do you retain it, but how does someone then progress through an organisation, and an organisation that actually, when you look around, doesn't look like you, doesn't sound like you, doesn't perhaps have the right support or frameworks in place. And I think that's why there is a problem, that actually the higher and more senior levels, you start to see, and we've seen it every year in our reports, you start to see those numbers drop off, specifically with women, specifically with people from minority ethnic backgrounds, and particularly with people with disabilities. So there is, and again, it's quite a frequent, I should say, conversation that we come back to when we're talking to broadcasters, because there is a problem in that middle tier. And as I said, great, hire diverse talent, but it's not about diversity, it's about inclusion. How do, if someone is different, how are they able to bring the whole of themselves to work and feel comfortable, and also feel like they have a career path ahead of them, and not just get a foot in the door and actually leave pretty quickly after that. So that is a real that is a real issue that's as I said, we've been reporting on probably for the last 2 or 3 years.
Babita, any ideas on the solution? How do you retain the staff?
I think it's about making sure people feel valued and that they know that they've got a career path at the organisation, and that starts with, you know, the simplest of things of objective setting and making sure people have mentors and coaches, and they feel that there's a plan in place for them to progress within the organisation. But also, you know, from a top-down point of view, looking at your succession plans and making sure that when you're looking at you know, when you're looking at those sort of leadership middle management roles, who are the people that you're bringing up, or who's the talent that you're nurturing to come into those roles, and making sure that those individuals have support and scaffolding, whether that's mentoring and coaching, but also the right training, you know, in place to make sure that they feel that that sort of stretch goal is achievable, that they're not being set up to fail, where you know, people are going to say, oh, well, they were never really good enough anyway. You know, I think there are lots of parts of that inclusion and progression piece, and I think that's the bit, as I said earlier, that I don't think we've all cracked enough of yet. You know, we've done a lot of the attraction bit and stripping out, you know, unconscious bias or whatever during the recruitment process, but it's making people feel valued and having proper career development plans in place for people once they're there, and having good succession plans that include a broad range of people, not just the obvious choice. I think those are the things we all need to really grapple with and crack.
And Kamal, do you think companies have been lazy in using the excuse that, you know, we've recruited, we've done our bit, job done, and they're not looking at the progression of careers and, you know, where people actually end their career? Are they ending their careers at the entry point because they've not found any fulfillment or any direction?
I think in the past that may well be true. I think there has been a lot of thinking about this. You have to change your culture. You have to change your internal culture, and you have to be aware of your biases, and that people tend to promote and retain in their own image. And if that image is non-diverse, you tend to just repeat that over and over again. People need to really think about this. I worked at the Equality and Human Rights Commission for nearly 3 years, and I did huge amounts of diversity work with the private sector as part of my job. And you asked me if I'd done unconscious bias training. I've done loads and loads of conscious bias training, i.e. I've worked, you know, you have to work hard at what is it I'm bringing to the table that is my own problem. And in a leadership role, how do I make sure that people are around me to stop that? You have to change the culture, and inclusion is the bit, as Vikki says, that is the important bit in culture, because there is no point in getting these people to join us who bring great difference to the table, and then we ask them to be like us. That's not diversity. That is just filling, you know, quotas or numbers, or, you know, you haven't actually done anything. So culture is the most important thing, and it's the hardest thing, because lots and lots of people think they're really great and they get all this and they know what they're doing, and actually nobody does. And we have to think about this every single day and take on a bit of, it's about, I suppose, about being a bit humble and admitting where your, I think, as you said, Babita, where your blind spots are, and that we all have them, and that we all need to surround ourselves with people who allow us to fill in those blind spots. So I think it is the culture change that is the most important bit.
Do you think I was just going to say, do you think we're taking the wrong approach entirely, and rather than sort of looking to the trenches and employing there, we should start with the leadership, because that's where it all flows from? So if you start with the leadership, as you said, Kamal, perhaps you recruit in your own image and your own prejudices come into play. Should we not start with the leadership? Vikki?
That's where the signal has to come from. I mean, Tony gave a speech about diversity of thought, and I certainly haven't heard a DG speak in the way he did last year about diversity and what it meant to the organisation, because there has to be a commitment from the top that needs to flow through the whole organisation. So I think you're absolutely right that without that commitment, you're not going to get anywhere. And Tim Davey, who is going to be the next DG, obviously, has led on this work. So, you know, that there has to be
but
that.
I'm specifically talking not about the commitment, I'm talking about the individuals coming from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, rather than them having the aspiration to, you know, move towards diversity, actually coming from those backgrounds. Vikki, you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, it's two things really knitted together. I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. We've been unequivocal in our messaging that this has to be driven from the top, and also senior managers, chief execs have to be held accountable for the progress they're making. But it goes to the point that we were discussing just before, it's that frozen middle. And if you unlock that in terms of succession and progression throughout a company, you know, a lot of that brilliant, diverse, creative talent is right under your nose. But it's how you then create those opportunities and flex out that organisation in order to have different voices at much more senior levels.
Babita, is there anything to
Yeah,
add?
no, well, I was just going to add that actually this is why it's so important, and Channel 4 do it and BBC do it as well, is to have separate targets at a leadership level. So you know, Channel at the BBC, I know they have the leadership as well as all staff target, and at Channel 4 we talk about having representation in our top 100 paid, and that's important, isn't it? Because actually they're the people who are making decisions. They are then recruiting in their own image, and hopefully, you know, they're thinking and bringing that diversity of thought into the recruitment process. So that is so important. And I think across the board, we tend to do better at an all staff level than we do at that leadership level. And you're right, we need to flip the focus, and actually we should be over-indexing in leadership so that the all staff happens organically almost as a result.
Absolutely.
The one test, on that, I'm just aware of the time, the one test on that is don't just test what you can measure. And it is really important that, you know, when it comes to these type of issues, we are thinking about things that might not be visible. And that is about why the culture is so important. There is no point in a middle-class organisation becoming more diverse by just getting loads more middle-class people in. That is not doing the job for us. So we need to think carefully about not just measuring, you know, what is sometimes simply in front of your face.
Any more questions? Can we take any more questions from the audience? Yes.
Yes, so this is quite a practical one, but it's saying what work is being done to offer work experience to broadcasters to be from socially and economically disadvantaged areas of the UK, particularly those who can't afford to move to London?
That's a very, very good point.
Babita. I'm going to pick that one up because actually the move out of London for Channel 4, so the Bristol hub, Glasgow hub and Leeds hub, was very much driven by that need to make sure that you don't have to come to London to get a job. And particularly I know in Leeds that the vast majority of the people that have been recruited in Leeds are from the local area, and that's so important, you know. And the same with Bristol as well, because we have for so long been London centric, and London is not a cheap place to be, and unless you can afford to come and stay with relatives free of charge, you know, it's almost an impossible thing to come and do work experience in London. So that move out of London is driven particularly by making sure that we have representation in the nations and regions, but also because we need to address that socio-economic makeup of staff. And actually Channel 4 do monitor this, and I think BBC do as well. And you know, we were embarrassingly the poshest broadcaster when the first socio-economic diversity report came out that Sam Friedman did, and we've taken that really seriously, and you know, we've pushed up to, I think we're about 30, nearly 40% socially mobile staff now, and it's a real focus of ours because we recognise, you know, I talk about the Sam Friedman research. that found that the media industry is an elite profession. It is, you know, in the same way as sort of the medical and legal professions are. They're a bit of a closed shop if you're from a particular socioeconomic background. So we need to break down those barriers, and moving out of London is really, really important for that.
Before I come to Kamal, can I just say we have tons of questions. Can I ask the panel if they're okay for another 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Would that be okay?
I can't do 10, Gillian. I can do a couple. I'm really sorry. I've got to go and sort something out relatively urgently.
Absolutely understand. So I'll let you come in on that question of work experience for those that aren't in London.
Yeah, I think just thinking about what Babita has said, we obviously have had an out of London strategy for a number of years now, and that is about bringing people being able to get into BBC News without having to come down to London. As you say, Babita, that has often relied on friends and family or your own wealth to be able to do that, and even with paid internments and paid trainee schemes, even so, the pay is not high, and it's quite a sacrifice for lots of people. So that's one thing. And then I think the second point is around us understanding that we need people from different socioeconomic backgrounds in our business, as you say, Babita, because otherwise you're not serving your audiences. And we need to understand that we need to be out there offering jobs in the way people want to do it. The one thing that we've really seen since COVID-19, this job can be done remotely much more than we imagined. We built in, in the centre of London, a fabulous and fantastic headquarters, and we've had to go to 20% occupancy, almost overnight, not quite, but almost overnight. And that has made us think very carefully about what is the more distributed system of how we employ people, which allows us to be all around the UK and all around the world. And will maybe stop the idea of, if you want to work for BBC News, you really must come and work in New Broadcasting House in the centre of London. And so COVID-19 has really broken through some of the things I think may have taken us years to ever get to, that actually you don't need to be in a building to be a journalist. And that's a really great thing, which I think will really help break down some of those socioeconomic barriers and barriers to getting into our industry.
I probably shouldn't say this, but I think I actually prefer my Zoom meetings now, or my team. They're much more efficient. They're much more efficient. Kamal, thank you very much. We know that you've got to leave, but we are actually going to wrap up now, because time is of the essence and we're all busy people. So thank you to all of you panelists. It's been insightful to hear your perspectives on diversity. There's still much work to be done, that we know, and that was clear. We can see from the views of the audience as well. The John Schofield Trust will be assessing this conversation to understand what can be further done to build a better representation into newsrooms. So please keep an eye on the newly launched website and social media platforms, www.johnscofieldtrust.org.uk, on Twitter @JSchofieldTrust, and John Schofield on Instagram. Thank you very much for taking part, Babita, Kamal, and Vikki, and Louise and Zeba, who've been taking your questions. I hope we've learned a lot, and we hope we're on the way to solutions for a more diverse workforce within broadcasting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gillian.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.